Sanjay Swami, co-founder of MCheck, Zipdial. Now in his new avatar, he's an angel investor. And by the way, he has also been the man behind UID. If you have any questions on the UID APIs and authentication, you can just throw at him.
Okay, can you guys hear me? Okay, so I'm going to just spend about 20 minutes talking, which is short by my standards. So, but I've been told it's a hard stop. And wanted to ask a few questions before we get started. How many of you are entrepreneurs currently working in your own startup or a startup you've co-founded? Okay. How many of you are working in a startup though you're not a founder or co-founder? And that would not be a startup like Microsoft. Okay, and how many of you work in a big company? Okay, what are you guys doing here? Good. So, yeah, I'm sort of a misfit in a big company. I worked for 1 year at Xerox. Actually did a big deal with Microsoft at the time. There were 90,000 employees in the company, and every morning I woke up with a new idea, went to talk to people, and the other 89,999 would tell me why it was not going to work. And so fundamentally and culturally, life in a startup is very, very different. Every day is, a day of new opportunity. Every day, more often than not, ends in frustration. But I keep telling people there's 360 days of glory and 5 days of frustration and 5 days of glory in the startup. But those 5 days really make up for the rest. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my new avatar as an angel incubator partner, and then talk a little bit about one of the ideas that Amit had asked me to talk about startup idea validation, and then we can take some questions. So I started Angel Prime a few months ago along with a couple of former founders of Snapfish. Snapfish had 4 founders, Bala and Shripati, as well as with Raj Mashruwala, who was the founder of Tipco. And all of us have a variety of startup experience, and all 4 of us work together at UID. But we are really intending to be very close co-founders working with entrepreneurs. So we are not investors in the classic sense. Yes, we do bring in money into the companies, but we have an office, companies are incubated in our center, and we work day and night. I still get up at 4 o'clock and take the 6 a.m. Indigo flight to negotiate a deal because it's 500 rupees less than the Kingfisher flight. Not for much longer though. Anyways, so the point is that we are very, very hands-on people, and we basically are very actively involved in the companies. So our offices are in Whitefield, and we work day to day. We're there from 8 o'clock till 7 o'clock or whatever time it takes. I go to bed at 1 a.m. Still very, very actively involved. Ideating, rapid prototyping, validating key assumptions, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Getting a top-notch team. For those of you who started companies, how many of you look to either close friends or best friends or colleagues as co-founders? That's a very high percentage, right? And how many of you feel your co-founder is very similar to you? And if your co-founder is sitting in the room, don't worry, has similar background. That's actually good. So you've got someone with a different background to be the co-founder, because what you don't want is really 2 identical background people. Similar is also still okay, but we must have areas of strength. But assembling a top-notch team is something that startups struggle to do, and that's something that we are very actively involved in. We do a lot of business development, and the last but not least is all the so-called necessary evils of running a company. The legal structure, the accounting, the HR practices, things like that, which you can't do with, you can't do without. I jokingly say that's like a wife, because actually my wife happens to be an accountant. And it's one of those things you can't do with, can't do without. So you guys have to do it right. We provide up to 500K in seed funding for these companies, and really focus on having the entrepreneurs focus on building the companies. And then we take all the companies all the way through to Series A preparation. In any case, we're involved even after the Series A. And to date, we've launched 2 companies under this structure. As a third one that's being launched. The first one, how many of you have seen, used, heard of ZipDial? Okay, the others have not been reading the newspaper. So it's a missed call-based platform, used very widely. A lot of conferences at NASSCOM. Probably about 200 million plus request service to date. Very, very exciting company, we believe at least. A very simple idea, and the reason I'm putting it up here today is in terms of idea validation, right? This was an idea, when I discussed it the first time with people thought I was joking. They thought I was just saying that to start a meeting, and then I would talk about something else later, and they kept thinking, what is the idea that he's going to talk about, right? But it's really a very interesting company, a lot of large customers, big brands. In fact, today Gillette just launched a campaign where you zip dial a number and you get a call back with a personalized message from Salman Khan, which is pretty interesting to see the type of activities that are being done on a very, very simple, basic platform. In fact, it's just one bit of communication. You dial a number, that's it. But it's by far the simplest call to action platform, and we deliver tremendous ROI for advertisers. And that's why the company has been recently successful. The second company which we'll be launching is a payments company. You guys know my background a bit, so if I don't have a payments company going on at any point in time, I can't sleep. And if you have a payments company going also, you can't sleep. So, but it's a really exciting and tough space to be in, and with all the ups and downs of this industry, it's one that I'm very, very passionate about. This will be launching pretty soon. And we also have a third company, which is an e-commerce startup, where we're just putting together the team. And again, something that Vij said was very important. You have to have some differentiation, right? Yes, it's a hot space. A lot of VCs are putting money in. Remember, that's the start of your problems when you take VC money, and it's not the end game, right? So make sure that you're going to be able to sustain this thing and fight it out over a period of time, which means you better be thinking about differentiation, and it's not price. That plan basically is every year we will do 3 to 4, really exciting companies where we get great people, great technology, and hopefully build fantastic market share. Right? So everything that Vij said is exactly what sort of we look at as well. The market share you have to build out in the field, but things you can do right, which are in your control, is focusing on the business where you bring some differentiated advantage from a technology perspective, and you build a great team. Because that is something which is generally in your control. So I was going to talk a little more about idea validation. So the first point here is, just because something seems simple, just because you think somebody else has attempted to solve this problem, just because somebody else tried 3 years ago and it failed, and they were supposedly much smarter than you, doesn't mean that everything is a solved problem, right? And some of the most obvious solutions to problems are things that you and I might not even think is a problem. And somebody comes up with a solution and you go, oh my God, why didn't I think of that earlier, right? I would say ZipDial falls in that category. I've talked to so many people, and after they get it, like, damn, why didn't I think about it? It's been there forever. People have been doing missed calls, and you can always do actions on it, but nobody did it, right, for the longest time. Again, people may have done it, some gas company did one small use case or something like that, but to do it as a platform which is interoperable across multiple parties, and to turn it into a business, right, which is what the hard part is. It's not about the idea. It's validating it, it's executing on that idea. That is where, you don't need to necessarily look at an unsolved problem. I think that's the main point. The second is, you can't just say, oh, I'm going to get an idea today. You have to eat, breathe, live this, right? It has to be in your bloodstream. You just can't make a decision to say, I'm going to become an entrepreneur, I'm going to get an idea, I'm going to work on this idea, right? So, if you're not an entrepreneur, want to become an entrepreneur, you have to constantly be driven by the urge to make a difference, right? And to make something better than it currently is, right? That's your only hope. It may be to target a small segment of people, it may be for old people, it may be for kids, it may be for handicapped, maybe for blind. But fundamentally, the reason you exist is because you are going to change the way a certain segment of people does something that they're currently doing, or you're going to allow them to do something that they could not do in the past, right? And every example you think of a successful company just fundamentally changed something. It may mean that you rob Peter to pay Paul, and if you look at Dell's example, they cut the middleman out of the system, but they fundamentally changed something for the better, right? Or at least they perceive it as for the better. And a lot of what you read about, the status quo, and if you read HBR's review on the anti-piracy stuff that's going on, it's really saying that the incumbents are being threatened right now by the upstarts, right? This is another word for startups. And they want to preserve the status quo, whereas as a startup, the only thing you can strive to do is make something fundamentally different and better, right? And that has to be, because you don't know when this is going to hit. It's often in the shower, but when you get this, brainwave of an idea. But really, it's fundamentally, if you're not constantly thinking about, can I make this chair better? Can I make this phone better? Can I make, why isn't the ergonomics of this phone better? There are some very simple things that can be breakthroughs. And some of these, by the way, might also be IP protectable, right? So don't assume that just because, a groove on the phone where your finger sits is a simple thing to do, that you might not be able to get a patent on it, right? Now, it might not have any value unless it becomes a big deal, but you have to be thinking about, can I make a difference and how do I differentiate? And again, just to reiterate the point, you can't plan on these things happening. Ideas happen when they happen. Right? But you need to be capable of spotting the idea. Somebody might say something in passing, and if you're tuned into that conversation and you're constantly thinking about other problems that you are running into that you might solve, the light bulb might go off when someone says something completely orthogonal to the final use case that you have in mind. That's the missing link. Now I've got a company here, now I've got a product. So this is something, again, I keep telling people, you have to just constantly be thinking, I'm going to change the world today. Right? Something's going to happen, I'm going to change the world. However, and this is again an interesting challenge with startups. I tend to be very open about what I'm working on, right? I may not stand up here and say everything that I'm working on, but very early on, I start talking to a lot of people who I think are important in this space, right? And I don't hesitate giving them a lot more information than most people do, right? Because I look at it and say, this is all about reputation, right? Somebody takes your idea and steals your idea, well, they can screw you once in life, right? Their reputation will be so bad after that nobody will share anything with them. So I don't worry too much about, well, it's confidential, it's proprietary, I don't want to tell anyone about it till I build it all up, and then I realize that nobody wanted it in the first place, right? So I'd rather err on the side of letting a little bit more than I should, and making sure that I've got proper validation. And the most important thing is not that people actually validate the idea, it's that people shoot it down, right? Because people will always say, yeah, that would be great if it was there, right? I would use it, right? Would you pay? Even when you just ask the question, would you pay for it? You'll see a lot of people, I'm not so sure, it depends, And you get that kind of an answer, you know that when time comes and you build the product, nobody's going to pay. Right? So it's very important to try to validate very, very early on. And you're validating people, you're validating functionality, you're validating technology, you're validating viability, you're validating business model, all of that very early on. Right?
Who do you validate to?
Exactly. So that's a good point as well, right? So clearly people you trust and respect. Right? So for example, a lot of people would say, don't go to a VC, they're just going to, take your idea and run with it. I can tell you, VCs I know and I've met don't have the bandwidth to steal somebody else's idea, right? They just have no interest. The reason they might do it is they might say, that's a great idea, but this guy is absolutely useless and he's never going to be able to pull it off. Let me find somebody who can pull it off, right? But ultimately, as Vij also said, it's about the people. That's 1/3 of everything we're going to build. And in the beginning, it's probably 90% of what the company is, right? If not more. So in general, you may have a great idea, but VC might look you in the face and say, you have no idea what it's going to take. This is an awesome, massive idea, but I think you need to get a CEO. I think, and people will be very objective sometimes, right? You may not agree with them. I've had companies where I've also been associated with where they looked at the founding team and the PowerPoint and said, yep, but we need to get a CEO. And I said, if you're not betting on the founders, I'm not interested in bringing the company to you. But fundamentally, investors are seeing a lot of companies, right? And it's important for you to bounce off at least one or two people who are investors. You don't have to go only to investors, right? On the technology side, again, great architects, right? Ultimately, technology is what's going to differentiate this company in the beginning and, create a barrier, right? Can you create a barrier around a silly idea like or what was perceived to be a silly idea like a missed call, right? There's a tremendous amount of energy, of technology that's built into that platform. And when anybody tells me, oh, that is really easy, I'll build this thing by Monday, I'll buy you lunch at the Leela, please show it and working on Monday, right? And people, I'm sure, go back and do some research and they realize it's not as simple as it sounds. It's not as complicated maybe, but, so building in, differentiation over a period of time. Do you have the bandwidth to build it? You have to, validate this with technologists. Business model is the most important thing to validate. It is absolutely useless if nobody's going to pay for it, right? So you have to talk to a variety of people, right? And you will find a lot of naysayers, and they are very good. The most dangerous is people saying, absolutely, man, this thing is going to rock, everybody's going to buy it, you're going to have 100 million subscribers, you're going to adopt this phone and put your operating system on their phone. Doesn't happen that way, right? We all know that. So you need to really get naysayers who are going to say, who are going to tell you, as much as I joked over Xerox and where people say, tell you why things will fail, you need people to push back, right? Because what happens is, you start drinking your own Kool-Aid way too much sometimes, right? And then, no matter what people tell you, you're like, no, but I will pull it off, right? So you need to be able to balance that. The other thing, and the most important point, is the 360 days of frustration and the 5 days of fun that you have in a startup every year, right? For 7 years. Are you ready to clean up that pipe? Right? You're going to get an engineer who's going to walk in and say, I'll do this stuff on the weekend, I'll come in, I'll work part-time, give me some equity, come and write some code, spaghetti code, take off, you pay him, and you're not capable of evaluating it till you get a proper CTO who looks at this and has to throw all this crap out and redo everything. At the end of the day, are you ready to run this company when this is the state, right? Are you committed to that space? That takes more than money as the motivator. It takes a lot of belief and passion, right? And I'm saying this because we all like to look at, the day when, everything is fine. And we think that, well, yeah, but, I'm going to keep my room clean from day one, right? That's what we all say. But by Saturday, this is the state of the room. Same thing with the company. It may take 7 weeks instead of 7 days, right? But you have to be paying attention on day zero, right? And you have to be absolutely committed to pushing it through, because there will be days when it's going to look like this, right? Or when it's going to feel like this. And those are very demoralizing days, I can tell you, right? And if you're not fundamentally in belief that this is a big thing, if your partners are not, and that's where choosing the right partners is very, very important, right? Because doing a company with friends is a lot of fun when things are going well, right? But on those days, you risk your friendship. Family is even worse, right? Even harder. So the best thing to do actually is to work with people who you know well, trust well, but are not really close friends, because the friendship has to last beyond the company. That's my advice. I haven't followed my advice, by the way, but I would recommend that to people.
You said belief and passion. But belief in what and passion for what? Because you made a passion for an idea, but in the validation stage, people tell you that this is not going to make money. So does that mean you pack up and go, or I guess you answer?
So when people tell you, the question is it reasonable what they're saying? Do you acknowledge that they're right? This is never going to make money, but I'm still going to do it. That would be a foolhardy thing to do. But you may disagree with them. I say, I don't believe that's true, and these are the 5 reasons why I'm going to change the world, though nobody else did, right? So at that point, your belief actually is going up, right? Because your close friend argued with you about it, said it's never going to work. But in the process of countering his argument, you actually started coming up with more justifications, right? And that started driving the belief, right? So that is what I meant, right? One of the other interesting things I've always found is, when I come up with an idea, the first company that makes money out of it is GoDaddy. Right now I've discovered Big Rock. Big Rock guys are here? Okay, look out for a lot of domain names that I'll be registering. Right? Because that to me is sort of the first where I'm ready to spend 100 rupees, man, on this idea. Right? I'm going to give it a name. Right? It's very important, I think. Like, you don't have to spend and everybody go running and buy Big Rock stock here. But the important thing is you're taking it seriously. It's you're putting a mark and saying, I think this is an important idea. Second thing I do is initially I talk about it. I talk with my wife a lot about it. Very very patient lady. And I was going to say young lady, but with all my ideas, she's probably aged a lot as well. But I think talking to women, by the way, is a very good idea for all the men out here. Maybe for women it works well to talk to men, I don't know, nobody is bouncing off me. But I think it'll give you a very different perspective, right? And my wife will shoot things down, just as I'm starting the first sentence, I was like, oh man, I thought it was going to be $1 billion company, it's gone now, right? So, the reason that's important is because they approach things very differently, right? And generally, especially if it's someone with a different background who's not working day in day out writing code, their perspective will be very different, and it's very important in terms of who you validate with, right? To make sure you're validating with different people. Make sure you're validating with people who are going to be the customer. That's very important. But one of the things I found is I always just stash it away for some time and don't talk about it. Right? And you will find that it will come back and keep nagging you. Right? If it's truly a compelling idea, no matter what you do to shut it away from your life, it's going to give, it's like that pup that's going to come and hold on to your foot, to your pants and say, take me out. So a really good idea, even when you think you're not going to do it, will keep coming back and bothering you. And to the extent where you say, I'm going to investigate this somewhere. Right? So I think it happens sort of naturally. When you have an idea, the subconscious mind is processing, even though the conscious mind has said, I'm not interested, I'm not going to process. And over a period of time, if it's really solid, it'll come back and keep bugging you saying, do it, do it, do it. Yeah.
What was the tipping point with Zipdal with so many people coming back and saying that may not make sense? We keep bouncing it back into plastic circles.
Mm-hmm.
And then they say, you still have this nagging point saying, I should do it, although I'm getting this kind of feedback. And when did you actually decide that to hell with what they say, I'm just going to go and implement it?
So in Zipdal's case, yeah, actually, we had the idea, I would say, 4 months before we did anything on it. The first time, two of us talked about it, and we met one weekend, wrote down the business plan. Valerie is the CEO, and Amia is the COO. Amia came on board a little later, actually, when I had just left MCheck, and he pinged me on chat and said, what are you doing next? I said, I have this nutty idea. And he had fractured his left hand, actually, at the time. And he loved it so much, he said, you got to do this thing, I'm with you. Right? And on the weekend, three of us met, and Valerie said, well, IPL is in 3 weeks, why don't we launch a polling exercise for IPL? Right? So Amia literally wrote the first version of Zipdal single-handedly, right? Because he had a fractured left hand, so it was all one-hand coding. So that thing worked, right? So it was really one of, three of us were, very convinced about it. And so what happened was, I used to look at ads, I'd look at TV, I'd look at all these interactions and go, oh, we could do this thing with a missed call much easier. Right? And it kept, every time, everything I looked at in life, when I saw a billboard ad, when I saw a call to action, whatever, I kept looking at it saying, man, if we had, we didn't call it Zipdal then, but if we had something like a missed call, it would be so much more effective. And as you start talking about it, you start, believing. That's the risk though, because you start drinking your own Kool-Aid a lot at that time, right? So you need to surround yourself with people who are going to say, no, never. But at some point, you just have to jump in. And you can read all the books about swimming, right? You have to get into the water at some point, right? And you really just have to try it, right? So one thing is, what's the risk of trying, right? And today with, Windows Azure and AWS and, all this stuff, the cost of trying a startup is actually very, very low. Certainly cost of promoting is very high. But it doesn't cost much to try. In fact, Zipdal is a little more expensive because there's a voice infrastructure and stuff like that. But in general, it's actually not that expensive to try. So I think the cost, the price, the risk, the opportunity cost of not trying is very high. That's what I would tell people today, especially because it doesn't. Everybody can put up a lakh and try a company out for 3 months. Right? Doesn't work. At least you know for yourself that you're not. Of course, if you do that every month, then that might be a little more expensive, right? But when it gets serious, just do it. Is the other thing is, people will tell you, oh, that guy tried it, man. He went to IIT, then he went to IIM, then he went to this thing and that thing, and he and his friends, they tried exactly the same thing. It never worked. It will never work, right? Don't be fooled by other people's failures. They succeeded. They're different people, different time, different circumstances, executed poorly. They might be very brilliant guys, and maybe it wasn't even exactly the same idea, right? Or you have some insight and some differentiation that they don't have, right? But the naysayers will tell you, people will fail. At the same time, you can't ignore it as well, right? If everybody in e-commerce is getting 70% returns, but on my shirts, everybody is going to keep it, right? That doesn't work as well. So don't ignore it. But don't be too driven by it as well, right? You can try it out yourself.
Still, a lot of people talk about, in the VC circle, they know some folks who are good, who can do this job better. Is that a situation that, okay, you are new to me, I don't even know whether you have a good team or you are a good person to execute this idea. I'll give it to somebody else.
Yep.
Does that happen? Because that's always...
I don't know of a single case where that happened, right? Personally, I've never heard, and I've seen a lot of situations, right?
Repeat the question.
Okay, so the question was, I have this great idea. I go to a venture capitalist very early to validate, and the VC says, not going to work, right? And picks up the phone 5 minutes later and said, hey, there's this guy who walked with this awesome idea, right? I've known VCs for a long time. I've worked in venture funded companies. I know when competitors of mine went to my investor, and my investor basically, all I heard was, this is from well-known venture capitalist fund, was, there is another company in this space that approached us, we have turned them down, just FYI, right? So that is the maximum information I ever got about a competitor from a VC, right? So again, they're reputed firms, you go to an Excel or a Helion or a DFJ or an Nexus or a big name that unlikely to run into this problem. What might happen is they may actually have somebody that's working on something very, very similar, right? They can't tell you that, and 3 months later something comes out, or 3 weeks later something comes out, and you're sitting there going, wait a minute, did that happen because I went there, right? I think you should just ignore it. These things happen in life, right? You can't worry too much about it.
That's natural for them that they have their own pressures to give returns to their investors. They have their own circles which they intertrade, right?
See,
you invest in my, I will fund this, but you take a stake in my VC fund or whatever. And in that circle, the idea gets spread itself in the VC circle itself.
Yeah, I try, firstly, I think this whole thing is a business of trust, right? I think you just have to trust people. You certainly protect yourself. Be smart about what you say. Don't let everything out in the first meeting itself. And say, yeah, I price it like this, I'll do it like this, I'll build this product, and this is the team, these are the people, No. But you can certainly discuss saying, hey, I'm looking at something in this space, I'm not yet ready for venture funding, but maybe in 6 to 9 months I will come back. This is the general area. What do you think of this space? What do you see as the issue? Let them talk. The best way to validate is to have the other guy talk, by the way, right? You don't have to necessarily blabber everything, but you validate by having these interactions.
Sanjay, what is that timing? I'm working on an idea, but currently I'm not looking for a cost. Right? I can sustain for another 6 months.
No, and you don't go to the VCs for money, by the way.
That's what I'm
Right? That is a very important point. When do you go and talk to venture capitalists, right? So what will happen is, at the end of the day, it will take 6 months to raise money from them. There's no question about it, from the first meeting, right? So you better have the first meeting early, right? And that's when you start validating, because the thing is, they're not writing you a check. These guys are going to sit in your board meetings and take weekly calls with you or monthly meetings with you, right? You better know that this guy isn't a jerk, man. I like the guy. You're going to deal with him for the next 4 to 7 years of your life, him or her, right? So it's important for you to build that rapport, and he's thinking the same thing, right? And over a period of time, do I know someone that knows you? All these things. You start building a relationship. You're building a friend. Right? You always look at it as you're building a friend, and by the way, he can help you in a certain way, but ultimately, you're building a relationship out here. So I would say it's never too, there are times when it's too early, clearly, right? It's not, I came out of the shower with this idea that never talk to a VC. That's definitely not something I would recommend. But when you've gone through a fair amount of internal validation, put your thought together, how am I going to get to market? How am I going to make money on this thing? Do I have anything special? What am I missing? Who else do I need to talk to get on the team? What type of profile do I need? You've thought through some of that. Then you're going and validating. So you're validating a business, not really an idea. By the way, let me just have one last slide. So, oops, that went much faster than I thought. Yeah, the other thing is, appearances are very deceptive. Some problems, problems appear very, very scary. And you look at this problem, oh man, no way, building my own mobile phone with my own operating system. There's no way I can think about doing it. It's so damn tough, right? But sometimes, that might just be a photograph of the other side. So the idea might appear complex, but as you dig into it, you realize it's not that difficult, right? And the good news is everybody thinks it's complex, so you're not going to have too many competitors coming in, right? The opposite is also true, but I can put this on the left and that on the right, which is really what life is all about. Everything looks very, very easy to do till you try to do it. And then you realize, man, this thing is tough. Sorry. But that's what makes it exciting, right? That's why you do a startup. Because there will be everything that you thought is going to work in your favor and everything you thought was going to work against you. I can guarantee you, if you write it down and you go back to any successful or failed startup 7 years later and you say, now show me your same list of pros and cons, you'll find it will be the exact opposite. Right? Or definitely what you thought would make you stumble would have been the last thing that you would have run into as a problem. But at the end of the day, you have to try it out. There are no shortcuts. If you want to become a successful blogger, there are two approaches. Become successful, become a blogger, or become a blogger and become successful. But that's it. You have to do it. Right? And so my advice to all of you is really, you want to do a startup, just do it. Right? There's no other solution to this. And it's a lot of fun, by the way. So I would say you have to, everybody says enjoy the journey, put in a crore and lost all my money. I think the learning that you get out of that, no MBA will give you. Right? So that's for sure. And you pull it off, by the way, less than 2% of ideas actually get started. So if you started, that means you're already in a 2% exclusive club. Right? Problem is in that club also only 2% succeed. So that's the tough part. Anyway, I'll open it up. Any more questions? I know it's already probably pretty late, but
3 questions.
So you talk about team is more important in early stage, right? So how do you define a good team, or how do you judge okay, this guy, okay, same example we have put, this idea is good, but this guy was not able to, he does not have the right skills to pull it off. How do you decide it out, or what do you think what should a founder do to be awesome in that? Okay, he feels that okay, idea is good, he has validation, but he does not have credentials to do that, or what's your thought on this?
So again, there is no magic formula, and that is the hardest part about doing a startup, right? Finding your co-founders. Right? And unlike in an aircraft, the role of the co-pilot is to fly the plane in case the pilot has a heart attack on the plane. Here, you need your co-pilot to do exactly all the things that you don't do. Right? So it's exactly the opposite requirement here, right? There is a little bit of overlap, right? So I think the vision can't be different. Vision has to be common. The end goal, or what you see as success or failure of this company, you both have to fundamentally believe in, right? And if it's a 3-person startup, it gets a little more complex also, but now 3 people have to have a common thing. Right? But 3-person is also very good because you have some, diversity in the background, so pretty much almost guaranteed, right? So I think complementary skills are very important, right? If one person is a strong technologist, make sure the other person has a strong business background. 2 technologists starting a company, we can talk about the Flipkart example, but that's the exception, right? I wouldn't count on it. what you should count on is common vision, complementary skills, right? Ethics, integrity, and how people have reacted to bad times is very, very critical. Right? Now, with young guys with my age, you can see clearly I've had some bad times. But when you're young, and you've not had much exposure, it's not clear, right, whether people will stand up, and that's why, risks are high. Right? But at the same time, when you're young, you have the drive and the passion, and what you don't know is actually a strength to some extent, right? Because now you don't know that 1 plus 1 cannot be 3, right? So you keep running and saying, I'm going to make it 3, right? So I think ultimately it's a gut feel. Right? You just genuinely believe this guy is a perfect person for me to work with, this guy or girl. So it's not very scientific, right? But the chemistry between the two of you is very, very important. And I've sat in investor meetings where they will just look at the CEO in the eye for the whole meeting sometimes, right? And if you're not the CEO, if you're the CEO, it's very unnerving. And if you're not the CEO, it's also very unnerving because you're being completely excluded from the conversation, right? But it's very important. A lot of people focus a lot on who's going to be the CEO and the core founder. Right? So that is very.
This question may be dumb to be asked.
No, there's no dumb question, but I can give you dumb answers. That's for sure. Sure.
I'm working and I'm getting a salary, and most like you said, you got an idea. I got an idea, but I want to work on it. I don't know what I'll be doing without a salary. So
no, without a salary, you'll be working your ass off on that idea. I can bet you that. Pardon my French. Because you need to get to where it's going to return some money to. Yeah.
Can you give a little, a pathway on how people approach these? And I don't know, there are many founders here. How to approach this? They were on salary. Then they started on something where the money came from apart from dad or something.
You mean for the business or to keep you going?
No, keep us going, and of course for the business as well. But businesses, I'm hoping that will not require a large amount of money. The stage of startups we are seeing here.
Even I am in your place.
Yeah. So I think it's a cliche term, but I would say, are you really passionate enough where you're willing to suck it up for 6 months, man? I'm going to, I'm going to give up my job, give up my salary, career, who cares about this career? Because I'm going to be so successful that it doesn't matter, right? And just jump in with both feet. And this is the, I don't know how deep the swimming pool is, and I don't even know if I remember how to swim, but, I'll find out, right? But the consequences are not that bad here, right? Because what's the worst that can happen? Especially if you look at India, right? And I don't mean to get everybody to write a resignation letter tomorrow morning, but if you look at opportunity in India, right, and everything people said about talent and stuff like that, 6 months later your job will be there for you, right? Whatever opportunity you have, and that's what I tell people, not to quit their existing jobs. But if someone says, I'm choosing between this and I'm getting 30% raise, and you're telling me to come without a salary for 3 months, right? I'm like, that 30% raise offer will be there 3 months from now, definitely, right? If you're not in that company, some other company, right? Unless it's a spectacular offer. But you don't know if you're giving yourself the opportunity to make $1 billion or $100 million, by not trying, right? So if you really are passionate about it, right? And you guys can be smart. People are smart. You said you work to midnight oil. All of us, probably have studied through professional education someday or another, and really woken up at 4 a.m. or gone to bed at 4 a.m. studying and whatever. This is for a lifetime of opportunity. Why wouldn't you do it, right? And people say, oh, money isn't everything. I can bet you money isn't everything is only told by people who have a lot of money, right? Otherwise, money is freaking everything, man. And it better be an incentive and a motivation for you when you're doing a startup. All I would say is, you should be ready to take the returns. It's an area under the curve problem. You're going to take it over 5 years, right? It's over the 12-month period, I'm willing to sacrifice, but over 5 years, it had better be one of my top 3 returns that I get out of it. It may not happen, but it should be a reason why you do it. So I would say, you have to make the call at some point, right? Because doing things part-time doesn't work very well. Your mind has to be 120% in this. Even then, it's like 2% of the company that want to succeed. If you're doing it part-time, it's basically the zero. So you have to jump in.
One last question.
Yeah.
You had mentioned about, before I ask my question, so for some reason I don't know everything that you said.
Is wrong. Rubbish.
It was kind of in alignment because I have learned my first time.
Okay,
So I don't know, I really thoroughly enjoyed it.
thank you.
Now coming to the question. So it's in relation to what he asked, something to do with founders. But so what's your take on friends becoming founders, co-founders? Does it spoil the relationship? Is it something that should not be done?
So I have a few places where friends have become founders, and things have not gone well, and I've observed that quite a bit, right? So you're also experienced that. The only thing worse than that is husband and wife becoming co-founders. No, seriously, I joke about it. And my wife is helping me a lot in our startups here, but we're not co-founders, right? I couldn't dream of doing that, right? But on the other hand, this is one person whose incentives are perfectly aligned with making this company successful, right? And I think the reason why I don't recommend that is it's just putting too much of risk and too much of pressure to succeed in one household. Right? So if it's husband and wife, I think that's the big risk. With friends, also what happens is there's a lot of pressure, right? You go to their house, Diwali party, and the wife is there, and you know that this year they didn't make a pay, they didn't get salary at all, right? And it is because 50% of the blame is yours. You didn't execute your part of it, right? So I think it puts a lot of pressure. Right? So you have to be very clear in those cases that when you meet socially or in personal life, you're not going to bring up things. So when there's two youngsters, single people, friends, it's pretty cool to do all this stuff. Right? Oh, we did this together. We went, we grew up in school. We went to college together, and then we started a company right after that. That sounds, that's fine, right, at that stage. But when you're in your middle age and in your late early 30s or in the mid 30s, now you're sort of rolling two families' risks into one venture. I don't like that personally. That's what I see as the risk. If you're able to separate the two, more power to you, right? Because there's nothing like someone else who you absolutely trust. Anyway, I think I've taken way more than was anticipated.
It was very wonderful talk. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. All the best. I'll be here for a bit.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.